right, everyone, just give me a second. I'm trying to share my screen with you, but it's showing the wrong PowerPoint. Okay. Thank you for everyone for coming. This is a seminar on applying to dermatology with DIGA and the APD. We are really excited to have you here. We have a capacity of 500 people. And so if you are not within the first 500, you will be watching this on YouTube Live. This seminar will be recorded and we will be sending it out to everyone who signed up at the end of the seminar. We will go ahead and do some introductions. Or sorry, we'll do a meeting outline first. So this meeting is going to be 75 minutes total, 5 minutes for introductions, and then we will have an update from Dr. Rossman and a poll, and then 45 minutes with a structured Q&A, 15 minutes for each topic, and then 15 minutes at the end where we will curate your questions that come either through chat or there's a Google Doc link through the YouTube channel that you can write your questions down. So there'll be two ways that we'll be fielding questions, and we'll be doing questions through there as well. I'm your moderator. I'm Roxana Donishju. I just completed residency at Stanford and will be starting as a clinical scholar at Stanford doing research and having an attending clinic. And my co-moderator is Dr. Candice Bailey. She is currently a PGY1 and will be class of 2024 at WashU Dermatology. And we have a great group of panelists here from the APD. The APD is the Association of Professors of Dermatology. It's a group of leading educators in dermatology. They're committed to advancing education and patient care and developing support strategies for those in academic dermatology. So we have Dr. Emily Altman, Program Director at University of New Mexico, Dr. Courtney Schott, who is a program director at University of Louisville, Dr. Friedman, who is a program director at George Washington University, Dr. Stumpf, who is a program director at Tulane, Dr. Rossman, who is a program director at WashU, and Dr. Warswick, who is a program director at University of Southern California. And then here are the lovely group of hardworking volunteers who are working through DIGA, which is a national organization that is helping students with interest in dermatology. Very, very, very thankful to them for their amazing hard work and dedication to bringing this webinar together. This absolutely would not have happened without them and without the APD, of course. And would also like to thank their amazing faculty advisor, Dr. Brodell at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. Thank you all for helping organize this. So we will be transitioning to a short talk by Dr. Rossman. So bear with me for 1 second. I will be switching PowerPoint slides. And Dr. Rossman, if you can let me know when I can advance for you, I will be happy to do so.
Absolutely. Thanks, Roxana. So while this is getting up, I
apologize. It still went back to that same one.
That's okay. I can give a quick, even as you're getting this ready, I'll just let everyone know. So as part of the APD, we do have a program director section, which Courtney and I have been leading for the past few months with a lot of support from some wonderful program directors, including people on this panel and many others. And we have made some recommendations that have come out from our group for the upcoming cycle, which I'm sure many of you have already seen, but I was going to go through them briefly. So that might sort of lay a foundation a bit for our discussion tonight. And then I do have a poll because there are some reforms that we are talking about implementing within dermatology and within other specialties that may help with the application process this year and moving forward. So I would love student input on that as well. So I appreciate you all being here. We're very excited about this. I know this is a stressful time and we want to make it, as not stressful as possible, even though I know that's it's hard to mitigate all of the anxiety, especially this year, but we're here to help you. So this is me. I'm the residency program director at Washington University. I am a dermatologist and dermatopathologist. And you can follow me and WashUDerm on Twitter and Instagram if you are so inclined. Okay, go ahead, Roxana. So as I mentioned, we released a statement in April and then that was updated in June. So the link is here. It's actually available on the AAMC website. And then also many of the dermatology residency programs do have this on their own program websites as well. I have it on mine and I know several programs do as well. All right, next slide. So we had some recommendations to programs as well as recommendations to students. Importantly, because of COVID-19, we have discouraged in-person away rotations. There are exceptions that can be made for students without home programs, but the recommendation for that is to really focus on a similar geographic area. So to look at the closest dermatology residency program to your school. And then we also recommended that programs could consider virtual electives or experiences, which many people are doing, and we'll talk a little bit about that as part of our discussion later. In terms of requirements and review of applications, we recommended that programs do not require Step 2 CK or CS. Particularly CS has been suspended, and it's been very difficult for students to take Step 2 CK. Now, remember these are recommendations. That doesn't mean every single program is following these. So you still want to check on individual program websites, but as an organization, this was our recommendation. We also discussed that programs could consider supplemental applications this year if they so choose. I don't think there are a lot of programs who are doing that, but there may be some. So that's again something that would be program specific. And then to encourage holistic review. And that really means to take into account multiple facets of an application, to not just screen on metrics, but make sure that we are looking at how COVID affected the institution that the student is at, the area, geographic area, what activities that you've been involved in beyond what we kind of think of as strict academic metrics. Next slide, please. Additionally, for letters of recommendation, given the difficulties in working with people at other institutions, and even particularly at your own institution, if some clerkships have been halted, we recommended that programs consider requiring only one letter from a dermatologist and give equal weight to letters from non-dermatology specialties. And then, if you're asking somebody for a letter, even if they don't know you that well, we have then recommended that programs or that faculty consider use of resident input or collaboration with other colleagues when writing letters if the exposure has been limited. And that's where also you as a student could potentially ask, could you write a joint recommendation letter with someone else that I've worked with as well? So there are lots of creative ways that you can get with letters that would be acceptable. For interviews, we recommend exclusively virtual interviews this year, and that's both for external and internal candidates, really to level the playing field so that candidates all over are getting virtual interviews regardless. And then to communicate interview dates early, and we will be hopefully releasing some of this information to students in the next couple of weeks. Next slide, please. For students, this is important. Now, I know that, first and foremost, seek individualized advice from your advisors. I think that goes without saying, and certainly as much mentorship as you can get this year would be helpful for people. What we would really like to do is start thinking about how to limit the number of applications that are received. As you noticed, we encourage programs to perform holistic review. That is incredibly challenging when we each receive 500 to 600 applications. And this year we only have a few weeks to review them because the period is shortened because ARIS has delayed release of all of that application information to us. So we want to be able to review your applications holistically, which I think gives everyone a really good shot at matching at a program that is a good fit for them. But again, that's really hard to do when we have 600 applications. We all have, we're all seeing patients, reading slides, doing surgeries, taking care of our current residents, and then doing the recruitment stuff. Really, it's obviously a big part of our job, but that's not the only thing that we do. And so it would really be helpful if students could think about what programs they would be a good fit for and what programs they really are interested in, and selectively limit those to about 40 to 60 programs. So for US allopathic first-time applicants, it's shown that beyond about 45 to 50 programs, you get diminishing marginal returns in terms of your match rate. And so considering keeping that to about that number would be excellent. We also recognize that this year with virtual interviews, there will be a lower threshold to accept many, many interviews. You won't have to worry about travel. There may be fewer conflicts because of that. But if you take every single interview that you get, even if you're not interested in a program, if it's number 20 or 25 for you, it means that someone else isn't getting that spot, right? So I think being mindful of that as well, and limiting number of interviews to about 12 to 15, which is also has been shown by NRMP match data, that beyond 12 to 15 contiguous ranks, meaning what you rank on your list, 12 to 15 programs, you're not really getting a higher match rate beyond that. So that is what we are asking of you. Obviously, we cannot really enforce any of this right now because of the way the match is, but those are our recommendations at this point. Next slide. So on that note, there's a couple of things that we are thinking about for this year. One is called preference signaling, and some of you may have heard about this before. What this means would be a method to signal interest in particular programs at the time of application. So what it would entail is that you would have 2 tokens, maybe more, maybe, we're thinking about 2, but it could be a different number, 2 tokens per student, and you would put that in at the time of application. Programs would then be notified if an applicant gave them a token. And what that means is you would be guaranteed holistic review. So you would not be screened out. You would actually, your whole application would be reviewed in depth. It does not guarantee an interview, however. We are looking at consideration of implementing this within ARIS for this cycle. We don't know if that will be possible yet, but certainly would love to get your input in that as we move forward with potential proposals. So I will ask that in the poll, but I wanted to give you that background. Next slide. The other thing we're talking about this year is coordinating the date of interview invite release. This is something that OB-GYN did last year, and I think plastic surgery has also done this. Essentially what this means is that we would have an opt-in process in which programs we would choose a certain date in which programs could release their interview invites. And so we would say, okay, on December 2nd, that's our interview invite release date. And hopefully a lot of dermatology programs would consider doing that on that date. You would then, as a student, have a 5-day grace period to kind of look at the programs, look at the dates, and figure out what schedule is going to work out for you best and where you want to interview. And then you would have a 2-day period to get back to the programs with your accept or decline of an interview. The hope with that is that it would limit the amount of shuffling that happens every year, because there's quite a bit of that, and it would allow you to plan better. Next slide, please. So again, this helps you make informed decisions about where to interview. It also helps us make sure that applicants who are interviewing with are truly interested in our program. It allows you to make informed decisions about what number of interviews to accept, particularly as we asked to consider limiting that to 12 to 15 this year. And it allows you to make upfront decisions about your interview schedule to avoid shuffling and late cancellations, and allowing everyone to have a fairer shot at interviews. Next slide, please. So now we have a poll. So let me just say a couple of things before we do the poll. For those of you on Zoom, the poll will actually pop up and you can go ahead and take that on Zoom. For those of you on YouTube, we put the link there, so you can go ahead and go to that Google survey and fill it out. I know there may be some faculty and deans and advisors and other people who are here listening, and we totally welcome you to the conversation. But if you can only fill out the poll if you're a student, that would be particularly helpful. So we'll give you a little time to do that.
Oh, and Alana, should we clarify for the tokens that that would not mean using a token for their home institution?
Yes, thank you, Courtney. So tokens would be, you would be encouraged to use, basically the assumption is you are not going to use it for your home program, use it for 2 other programs, because everyone kind of knows that you are still interested in your home program. And there are some questions I might want to answer right now just about preference signaling. You don't get your tokens back. You submit your tokens initially and you hope for the best. So you want to choose wisely about that, you know, where you think you're going to be a good fit. And again, this hasn't been done yet, but just so that you guys know kind of how that would work. It would be available to anybody who's applying. So that would include international and foreign medical grads. I want to see if there was any, do you get more tokens if you do not have a home program? That's an excellent question. And that has been brought up, that maybe people without a home program would get a third token, like an extra token to use because they don't have a home program. So I think that's something we can include in our proposal. And there were a lot of faculty who were proponents of that approach. And I will kind of mention the reason that we said 2, and that there's a question here about, would you favor more? If you use too many tokens, it actually limits the utility of them, because honestly, it has to be a very valuable thing. Otherwise, if a program gets too many tokens, it sort of defeats the purpose. And we also don't want to penalize students. Like if I didn't get a token from someone, I shouldn't hold that against them, right? And if people only have 2 tokens, I wouldn't hold that against them. But if they had like 10 or 15 and they didn't choose me, I might say, well, they had 15 and they didn't choose me. So I probably would be less likely to look at them. So that's the reason why it's 2. If we do implement this, the idea that this would be, you know, also for next application cycle, if it works. So I think the idea is, can we do this as a, you know, try it this year and see how it goes, but with the intention of keeping it around. All right, I think, how are we doing, Roxana, with does it seem like a lot of people have pulled in already?
So a lot of people have responded. I'm going to give maybe 30 more seconds because we have 84%.
Oh, wow, that's pretty good
participation. So
that's great. Some of the other questions on here, I think I could maybe just answer quickly so we don't have to worry about them later, but will step 2 CK be considered for those who have been able to take it? Yes, it just means that you don't have to take it. So we don't want anyone feeling like they have to travel or do something unsafe in order to take step 2 CK before the application process. If you've already taken it, that's fine.
I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll.
Okay, great.
Do you want me to share the results?
Yeah, please do. All right, so it looks like most people are applying this cycle, although we do have some preclinical and 3rd years on as well. So that's really helpful. And most people, about 75%, have a home institution. Okay, let's see here. I'm just kind of looking who we have. We have about 30% URMs. How likely are you to follow? So this is where the meat is, right? Let's see if you guys are being honest. We'll see what happens this cycle. Okay. Highly likely, somewhat likely. Okay, great. For interviews, yeah, we're definitely encouraging people. Obviously, we can't enforce this, but I think it's to be a good steward in the House of Medicine and to your future colleagues. 84% in favor of a token system, and it looks like most people want 3 to 5. Okay. And then 95% in favor of interview invite release coordination. So Scott was spearheading that process. So I'm sure he will be happy to see that. Okay, great. Yeah, it'll be very helpful to us. That's something, so I will tell you guys real quick, the interview invite release coordination is something that we could do in dermatology. We don't need other specialties. That's something we can make a decision about. The token is probably something that would have to be cross specialty. So that's going to be harder, honestly, to implement this cycle. We're hoping that we can, but we will see. Okay, well, I think that's all I have for now.
Okay, great. So I will stop sharing, put us into gallery view, which I think we are in now, and we can go ahead and start with the questions. And so the first topic, which is for Dr. Rossman and Dr. Schatt, is 2 questions. How do students express interest to specific programs? And how should students without a home dermatology program approach away rotations? So we'll have about little under 15 minutes to discuss.
So regarding, yeah, I'll go ahead. The specific interest, I do think, and Alana, you can tell me how you feel. Email is hard because we get so many emails, and it really becomes less meaningful as a program director because we get inundated with emails. So I think if we can't do the preference signaling, which would be great, I do think talking to your program director, or if you have a mentor to communicate with a program director at another institution, is very helpful. Because I do worry that with emails, they just get lost in the shuffle. I don't know how you feel about that, Alana. Do you go through all your emails detailed manner?
Yeah, I think it's hard with email. I agree. It's hard for us to gauge also, did you just send out 100 emails or are you sending out 2 emails, right? And I think that's where it gets very difficult for us engaging. Whereas if somebody that we know contacts us, or a faculty member, somebody says, I have this student who I know is really interested in your program for this specific reason, I think that's helpful. I also think there's ways that you can listen. I mean, you can personalize your personal statement. Yeah. So that is something that can absolutely be done, and you can have multiple personal statements. If you do that, that doesn't mean you have to personalize every single personal statement. If there's a few programs or a geographic area that you're particularly interested in, definitely let us know. A personal statement's a good place to do that. You could also let your letter writer know, and they could put that in a letter, and I think that's appropriate as well. With the letters, you won't have as much control over that because that's going to go to everybody. Your personal statement, you can actually say this personal statement goes to this group of programs and this one goes to this group of programs. So you have a little bit more control that way, but I think you can do it either way or both, honestly.
Yeah, and I think I've seen some people just add a little sentence at the end about, and that doesn't come off as, I think, genuine. I think if you really want to explain why, I have a family member where I grew up, or I visited this city a lot, or I really like these subspecialty clinics at this institution. So I think having that in your personal statement, I totally agree. I think that's very helpful because we read those. I really value personal statements a lot when we're looking at applications.
So. Yeah. Dr. Austin, I was going to ask you a follow-up question. So I know with personal statements, as you mentioned, you could do school specific. Would you say that maybe that's a safer place than a letter, because everyone might get that letter and that might hurt you at institutions outside that geographic area?
Yes. And that's why I think, unless you are applying very narrowly for a specific reason, like you might be applying narrowly because you have a partner someplace, or you're, in a situation. I mean, I applied very narrowly because my husband was still an MD PhD student. So, in that case, I think you could do it in a letter, but otherwise I think, a personal statement probably makes more sense. I also think that, it's not even, when you're talking about showing interest in a particular program, it also, you could think of it a little bit more broadly, that it's not necessarily showing interest in a particular program, but in a particular type of program. So if you are really interested in, certain things, like you really want to work at a VA, or you really are interested in like clinical research and someone doing clinical trials, that would apply to many programs. And that's something that then could be put in a letter, right? And so you could think about sort of how you're going to approach that. And if you want a letter writer to do that. But I do think putting things in your personal statement is easier and you have more control over that situation.
And I think really be genuine in your personal statement about what you want. I think a lot of medical students think that everybody wants to hear that you're going to be an academic dermatologist, but we know that that's, for the majority of people, is probably not going to be true. So if you really see yourself as wanting to do general dermatology, or if you see yourself really wanting to do research, that really, I think, is helpful, because we would like for everyone to be fully transparent to make sure that not only are you a good fit for us, but that we are a good fit for you, because we want residents to be happy. Because 3 years with spending time with each other, we're all going to get to know each other very well. And we want everyone to be the best possible fit.
Yeah, and it's much easier for us to support you in your career goals if we know what they are, and if we know what you're interested in, and we also have that framework in place. And so if you're super interested in, working with underserved communities, then going to a program that is like very research heavy but doesn't have the service component might not be great for you, right? And not to say that has to be, that can be a both and, right? But just as an example. So, and I think other things in terms of expressing interest, and this kind of goes with the second question about home program, if you don't have a home program. So some programs are doing virtual aways this year, and that's certainly something to consider, especially if you don't have a home program. There are going to be some programs who will allow you to come and do an in-person rotation, but that's really dependent on the institution and the institution's regulations. So I'd recommend that if you don't have a home program, the first thing to do would be to reach out to the dermatology programs that are closest to you geographically to inquire whether they would be able to actually accommodate you in person. And if not, ask if they have away rotation or virtual array rotations. In VSAS and VSLO, there should be virtual rotations listed. I know we have one there, and there are a lot of other programs that are starting to add those. We also are going to be releasing a Google document, hopefully in early to mid-August, that will have information from many programs, including virtual electives and who's hosting those. And so stay tuned for that, but certainly if there's certain programs that you are interested in, you could reach out to the program coordinator to just ask, are there going to be virtual rotations? Go to their website, see if you can find the information about that there. And that would be an easy way to express interest kind of earlier on in the process and to get to know more about that program.
And a lot of programs, I'm working on it. I know Alana is, are going to have virtual meet and greets where it's just an informal way to, at least for us, it would be very informal to meet the residents, talk with some faculty, because you can't do those away rotations. So I think doing anything like that, which we will all try to advertise and make available to everyone, is also just another way just for you to learn more and kind of get a sense about the type of people that, if they're happy, if the faculty seem like they really love what they do, as much as you can kind of gather that information, that's another good option. So.
And then I'll add, just since we're talking about home programs and preference signaling, since I saw a question, so I'll just add this in. There was a question about how do we approach asking our home program to pass on a preference signaling message without risking sounding ungrateful, uninterested in our own home program. So I think what that person is probably referring to is if you are asking your program director to informally contact somebody else about an interest, if we don't, like, let's say we don't have preference signaling this year, for example, we get it, okay? Like first of all, we can't accommodate every single student necessarily. I mean, some years I have 10 students applying from WashU, some years I have 2. So, we can't accommodate all of our internal students either. And we want you guys to be happy, and we want you to be supported, and we want you to be where you are going to thrive. And so for us, like, I'm never offended, honest. I'm 100% honest here. I'm never offended, and I don't think anyone on this panel is, if one of our students says, I like it here. I've been really happy here, but I really want to explore something else. Listen, you've been there for 4 years. Like, it's okay to move. Like, it's fine. I mean, I stayed at my institution, but like I had a partner there, right? Like, so it's actually, I think it's great for people to go to new places. You've learned something from us, and now you're going to go someplace else. I say that to my residents when they're looking at fellowships too. Like, don't feel like you have to stay here. I think it's better if you go someplace else sometimes. So it's okay to have new experiences. It's okay to say that. None of us are offended by that ever. And students usually will kind of say like, I really do want to stay here, but I really, and you don't even have to say that. We will always assume that you will be happy staying at our program. But if you want to go someplace else, it is helpful to us for you to tell us that, because then one, you may have classmates who do need to stay because they have a partner or whatever. And so you're letting them have that opportunity, right? And so it's actually very, I think, a nice thing to do and a collegial thing to do. And it's also good for you to do, to be honest about what it is that you want. And we're never going to be offended or hold it against you ever.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're not, it's not about our ego. It's about making sure that you all have a good match and that everyone ends up for a good fit. So I totally agree. Another question I just saw on the chat was, if you don't have a home program and you can't reach out by email, what should you do if you don't have someone to write a letter? I mean, I think if you were to email me, for example, and say, I don't have a home program, I think that adds extra weight for me to probably look at it a little bit longer. I don't know about Alana, but we understand that that's so hard for the applicants who don't have a home program. So don't be afraid to email. But what I would just say is put a little extra time into it. So, like she said, you could be emailing all 100 programs for all we know. Make it meaningful. And we're going to read it.
Right. If you email selectively to the 2 or 3 programs that you are particularly interested in for a particular reason, that's different. And if you actually put effort into that email so that we can tell, like, oh, this isn't just a foreign email, that you send, right? I think then you'll be more likely to get an answer, but you have to be mindful. I mean, there's 900 of you on this call right now, right? There's going to be at least probably 600 of you applying. We can't possibly respond to all those emails. So be mindful of that.
Yeah, saying dear sir / ma'am at the top of your email is a dead giveaway. I'm just going to say it.
Sure.
Thank you guys so much for all that great wisdom. We're going to move on to the next question. This next question is for Dr. Altman and Dr. Stumpf. The two questions are test scores weighted differently in the evaluation of an application this year? And if so, how? So other things to mention are letters of rec, personal statement, clerkship grades. And what can applicants do at this point to strengthen their applications, especially those who have weaker test scores and have had opportunities canceled?
Okay, so first of all, I want to acknowledge the fact that this is a totally novel situation for programs as it is for applicants. So we are all trying to figure out the best way to help you guys do well and help us match with candidates that really want to be there and really will be an excellent addition to our program. So it's all up in the air because of COVID. So a couple of things that that people asked about, what points on the application would be important if the board scores are not counted. So we know that many people are not able to take step 2. Many programs don't require step 2 at this point. And many programs are committed to a holistic review, which means that the board scores are either blinded or are not, or are a very low item on the scoring of the application. You know, other things like leadership, like service to the underserved, like distance traveled. And somebody asked, what is distance traveled? It means difficulties that you overcame, you know, struggles that you've had, how you succeeded in those, what kinds of life events you've dealt with in your life. All of that is important because we want to know that you are going to be successful through a particularly difficult residency. A dermatology residency is challenging. There is a lot of work, a lot of intellectual work, a lot of dealing with difficult patient situations. So the more life experience you've had, the more distance you've traveled, the better applicant you will make. So board scores are really not the most important thing. And all of the programs are preparing for the fact that there's going to be no USMLE 1 scores very soon. And we want to know that we will be able to choose applicants based on other criteria. And many of us have already been doing that for a while. Let's see, what else did I want to say? Oh, one other thing that I thought it would be important to mention for people that don't have a home program, and therefore it's difficult in this particular situation to get to know other programs, to get to know other advisors. There are a number of volunteers, both through the PD task force and through the organizations of medical students that are willing and eager to mentor students that don't have home programs, or mentor students that are URMs. You have to reach out to an organization like DIGA, for example, and see if there are volunteers, or to the PD task force, and we will be happy to help with strengthening your application, with advice on what kinds of things to do. The time is short, but there are still things that can be done to improve your applications. The other thing that I wanted to say, to underline again, virtual away rotations are pretty important. They're usually relatively small groups, And it's a way for you to get to know programs and for programs to get to know you. And that is probably second best to actually rotating through the program. Statistically, about 50% of the people that match to the places where they rotated. This year, that's not a possibility. So doing a virtual away rotation would be definitely helpful to get to know the program and for them to get to know you.
And I want to echo the similar, things covered as far as test scores and whatnot. There's very much less weight gone, over the years towards steps. And back to what's already been touched on with personal interests and things like that, showing interest is just, you want to have a strong personal statement. So that's one way we get to know you. If your test scores aren't, the best, we're looking at the whole application, that holistic approach. We're looking at how you've done through the years through medical school, your activities that you've done, not just the things you've done in the last 1 to 2 years. We're trying to see trends with, your leadership and volunteerism in just things that make you who you are. We're looking at you as an individual, not just a test score. Again, that personal statement is then becomes even more important. Your dean's letter. So, it's nice to know that people outside of, of just the applicants are participating in this webinar to help strengthen the support for applicants as well. Clerkship grades and comments and things like that you've done through the years in the last clinical years are also really helpful. As well, reaching out to your mentors if you have a home program to advocate for you, to give that extra touch, that personal touch in your letter writing, as well as reaching out as what was just kind of mentioned in the previous talk, and advocate for you on behalf at specific programs that you have particular interest in looking into. Those virtual way rotations, if possible, that gives you some introduction into other programs so that they, again, get to know you as an individual, not just, and expand your application. You can look for research experiences without publication. Not everybody has to be published. It's so hard to get published these days. It's really, so, it's just looking at your research experiences and, things that are not derm specific publications also go a long way. It's the same kind of work. It's just a different subject matter. So all of those things do factor in. And again, we're looking at things over time, not just, in the last 1 year, 2 years, things like that.
Roxana, do we have any other questions on this subject? Okay, so one of the other things that I wanted, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, Anna was muted. I just wanted to make sure that if she was trying to say something.
One of the other things that I wanted to add, and that's basically reiterating what Ilana had mentioned previously, is please look at the program's websites and look at what the programs want to see from you. Some programs will have supplemental questions that you may want to answer because that signifies to the program as well that you have a particular interest either in the geographic area or in the program itself. It really choose the programs that you think you're going to be happy at. Okay, because if you choose the program that is just one of the 100+ applications that you are sending and you match there, Murphy is the supreme ruler of the universe. You don't want to match in a program that you would not be happy at. Yes, you will end up a dermatologist, but as Courtney said, 3 years is a really long time. We really want you to be happy in this experience. After all, when you finish our program, you are our ambassador to the world. We want you to go out there and see what a wonderfully trained dermatologist you are. And for the people who go away from their home program to train somewhere else, it's always nice to have you guys come back and practice with us as our new faculty with the new experiences you get from the other programs.
So Roxana's having trouble. She's muted right now. I was going to make a couple of comments sort of based on some of the things that I'm seeing in common in here in the chat box and the Q&A box, and some of the things that Emily and Brittany said, which was all very important and very good. I think, you know, the thing about test scores is if you did great on step one, that's great. Like, congratulations. And I always feel bad, like when we talk about de-emphasizing step one, that people who did really well are like, but what about me? Like, that's great. It's just not going to be like the only thing we look at, right? So if you did really well on it, then that's great. And we'll see that, and we'll see that you did really well on it, but it's not going to be, if you didn't do well on it, that doesn't mean that your, you know, chances of matching are over. So I think there's two sides of that coin. The other thing about mentorship, there's a lot of questions from DOs, IMGs about getting mentorship in dermatology this cycle. Again, we're trying to be, and also getting information about programs. So I think that's where the virtual interviews come in. That's where meet and greets come in. That's where websites come in, social media. We are trying our best as programs to give you guys as much information about our programs as possible. I think the thing that you have to remember is that, you know, this came, as Emily said, this is all new for us too. And so we are managing, like, having to redo all of the resident clinical schedules and taking care of our residents and redo all of our didactics because of COVID, but then also redoing all of the recruitment this year. So it's a lot. And obviously this is our job and we love doing it, but, you know, we're trying to balance all of these things. And I know personally, I think this is probably true for a lot of people. You know, I had plans to I just took over as program director in July. I had plans to work on my website over the next several months. And now I'm trying to accelerate everything. But we are trying to really give as much information as possible. And we're trying to encourage other programs to do the same. We are going to be releasing this Google Doc that will have interview information. It will have website information. We're actually releasing internal stuff for other programs with recommendations of what they should put on their website so that they can be transparent to all of you. So the goal is really to give you information so that you can make, you know, informed decisions about your tokens, about where you're interviewing, all of that information. So we're working on it. Be patient. I will tell you, some of this may not be live until closer to September. And I know, you know, we have a little bit more time because the application date's now more like October 15th to 20th that these applications are due. There's no reason you don't get a benefit of submitting it earlier because we don't look at the information until mid to late October anyway. So I would say bear with us a little bit and maybe check back and look at programs late August, early September. I think that's where there's going to be a lot more information, and I see everyone nodding their head, so I'm not alone there. I also think in terms of for IMGs, if anyone else has great information on this panel for IMGs, I would love to hear it too. I think it's really hard. I'm just going to be honest. And I think it's always hard. And I think it's going to be harder this year. If you were able to do a clinical or research elective at some point before COVID, then that program becomes sort of your adoptive home program that can advocate for you. If you weren't able to, then I think you can reach out to programs that you are particularly interested in. I wish I had better information, honestly, and I just don't. So I don't know if anyone else has more experience and can give more information. And then I think the last thing I saw about, well, no, I think that was probably about it.
There was a question about whether or not taking a year off is beneficial, I saw. And I think that, I'm always, if you really want to do research and that's really what you're passionate about, do it. But if you're just doing it to get into dermatology, I don't think it really helps you. So if you really want to get an MBA and you want to be involved with, medical and business, like, do it. But again, I'm not going to select someone over somebody else who had the ability and the time and money to be able to do a year off just because someone else couldn't. So I think we have to think of it in that way too.
Yeah, I think the point really is, don't do something because you think it's going to make your application stronger. Do it because you are interested in doing it, because we can usually tell whether it's genuine or whether you were trying to pad your resume or add something to what you're doing. So if you're interested in something, then pursue it and tell us why you're pursuing it.
And just to add to that, to take a year off and not be productive will hurt you more than not taking a year off and not having a ton of publications. Obviously, you didn't have the time to do so. Just a plug for a year off, it's not just about research. It's also about having time to network, to go to meetings. Granted, obviously, we're limited in that with respect to having virtual meetings, but it's really an opportunity to devote your time to really harnessing various skill sets. And it's not just research, it's public speaking, it's clinic time. Various fellowships aren't just throwing you in a lab, but you're actually spending time in the clinic as well. So I think there's a lot you can get out of it, but I agree, you shouldn't just do it for the sake of doing it. You should do it because you think you're going to get something unique out of it that's going to help your career down the road when you are a dermatologist. But yeah, don't just twiddle your thumbs for that year, because that will hurt you, because everyone will ask, well, what did you do that year? You have nothing to say, you're kind of done.
And there are some comments here also about, not just about clinical rotations, but research. So we know that research and service opportunities have been curtailed, and that maybe you were working on something and then you couldn't finish it because of COVID. Put whatever you were doing in your CV, in your personal statement. Dean's letters are supposed to be talking about how your institution was affected by COVID, so that we know, and we will be taking that into account. We see that as valuable experience, even if you didn't get a publication out of it, or if you didn't get to finish something. So if you did something and you were super engaged in it and you owned it, that's what's important.
Hey guys, I got kicked off of Zoom for a while.
You're back.
Completely, but I'm back. So did you guys talk about topic 3 yet while I was gone, or we'll move on to that? Perfect. So topic 3 is about regional opportunities and virtual interviews. And this is Dr. Warswick and Dr. Friedman. How do applicants prepare for a virtual interview? How should applicants get the best feel for a dermatology program now that in-person meet and greets, away rotations, and in-person interviews are canceled?
That's it. Those are so easy, right? Scott, want to shoot it out? Who goes first?
You go first.
All right. Oh, how kind. So I think the first question, there's kind of 2 answers to that. So there's being comfortable with doing a Zoom interview, which, I mean, at this point, I think we're all pretty fluent in being on a Zoom webinar, because there have been so many, or participating in virtual didactics. I'm sure everyone's doing a ton of FaceTime, but it's very different being one-on-one or one-on-two for a set, maybe 15, 20-minute period where you're, I don't want to say being grilled, but you're being asked to kind of open a window into who you are. So my advice on that front is practice. I know there are various organizations that are setting up virtual practice interviews. I think certainly with, it could be someone local, at your school, it could be someone in your family, just practicing talking about common things that would come up in an interview, but doing it via Zoom so you feel comfortable, getting a feel for, do I look at the camera? Do I look right in front of me? Do I look over here? Do I make sure I'm not doing one of these the whole time? It is going to be really important, because obviously a big part of interviews is also body language, and that's changing with the virtual format as well. So practice, practice, practice. Part 2 is the practical element. Wherever you're going to do your virtual interview, make sure you have good internet connection. Make sure your camera is not facing a bright background, because you don't want to start your interview and be completely blinded out by a sunny background. Make sure if you're going to use earphones or earbuds, Bluetooth, for example, that they're fully charged. I actually just dying, so I'm going to actually have to switch them up right now, because one just died. There we go. I hope everyone can still hear me. So that's a great case in point. Always be prepared. But make sure to do a run through of every technical element before actually doing your virtual interview day, because the last thing you want to do is getting really animated and then freeze like that for like 5 minutes, and that's what everyone remembers you for. Scott, take it away.
I just basically want to second what you just, I think that's really great advice. On any given year when we're prepping students on interviews, we tell them to practice. And the advantage to this year is you can practice exactly in the place that you're going to be doing your interviews. So you can get set up, just like Dr. Friedman said, you can make sure everything is working, and it probably is going to feel really silly to do it, but practice with a few of your mentors, practice with some of your friends, and make sure that everything you're doing on screen comes across the way you want it to come across. I think the other thing, in addition to knowing, maybe upping on some particular questions that you think are pertinent where you're going to be interviewing, it's also really important to know yourself and know what you want to highlight in your interviews. It's equally important to know the program that you're applying to, and know a little bit about that program and what excites you about potentially interviewing there or being a resident there. It's really nice on an interview to interview someone that's excited about the program and the people that are there. So that's the only thing I would also add here.
Yeah, I think just to talk about interviews in general, virtual or not, If you got the interview, someone's already looked at your application, you met certain expectations on paper. So a lot of the interviews is just getting a feel for who you are and will you be a good fit for the program. Most derm programs are relatively small, so there's a family feel. Part of the interview is just making sure that you would fit with the culture. And it's also the same for you. I think Emily mentioned it before about, yes, it's 3 years and you'll become a dermatologist, but do you want those years to be miserable? And that no question will affect your ability to learn and develop a fund of knowledge and a repertoire as a dermatologist. So the interview is a two-way street. I know it's super competitive and everyone's super anxious. I don't blame you. I think all of us, regardless of how far out we remember that, but realize, for you to excel, you need to be somewhere that will really nurture you and facilitate a good experience.
I also just want to take a step back from before interviews and answer a few questions on there. So you're all going to have access to a document that has many schools' interview dates on it. We don't coordinate our dates amongst programs, but you will have access to many of the actual dates, and most of our interviews happen in December and January. That'll probably be the same this year for most programs. They can be any day of the week. And then in terms of how the coordinated release date is going to work, a lot of questions came up about the logistics of that. So the example would be, so if we send out as programs, and maybe 70 programs opt into this system, 70 programs on Wednesday, date X, are going to send out their interview invitations, and you basically will have 5 days to think about those invitations that you get. There won't be an option to respond about it. And then on Monday, exactly 5 days later after the interview invitations go out, and on Tuesday, so for a 48-hour period, you'll be able to respond back to the programs that sent you an invitation with a yes or a no. So there's a nice little cushion period that you have to think about the programs and which ones you're interested in and how many interviews you want to take and the logistics of all of that.
And then for the other question, which I think this is certainly a little harder, how do you get to know a program when you can't actually physically go? So I think first and foremost, websites are helpful. And I think historically, derm program websites have kind of not really stepped up to the plate. There's even a paper about this from several years ago. But because of that and because of everything going on, there's been a real push, especially from the APD, to update websites to get as much information on there as possible. So you really do get a taste of what that program's culture, not just what their academic prowess is all about. Virtual rotations have come up a lot in the Q&A. I think there are two types. There's the ones that are through VSAS that you can get credit, that actually will have you log in for a Zoom telehealth visit, versus the ones where you just go to the various virtual didactics. And I think there are a lot of programs who've become pretty fluent in virtual didactics. And I don't see why, if depending on their platform, allows for they have more opportunities or more space for you to join, or you can just reach out like, hey, can I come to your grand rounds if they're virtual? We have a lot of people come to our grand rounds, our resident didactics book club, some of whom have actually filled in for a virtual spot, but then, we have random programs just join us. And I think there is a lot of collaboration between programs right now in terms of sharing those didactics. So I think even if you were to go just to one, let's say one full day or one half day of virtual didactics of one program, you'll learn a lot about how the residents interact with one another, how the faculty interact. And I think it's perfectly fair to reach out to a program and say, hey, are you offering this? Can you share your schedule with me? And I would love to attend if I can. I would be very shocked if someone pushes back or doesn't even respond, because we get it. The world is a cluster right now. That's just reality. And we all have to work together, because you guys are the future of our specialty, and it's our job to make sure that you take it over and do a great job at it.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Dr. Friedman and Dr. Rossman have said already, which is our website is about 2 years old right now. We've been working on it for months to try and update it. So please don't look at ours yet. And that's probably the same for many programs. But definitely do look in the early.
Me too, working on it.
Yeah.
Can I just add something? One of the things that I don't think I was aware of before I became PD is there are rules about what we can respond to and what we cannot respond to if you email us during the process of applications. Okay, so we are restricted from many of the things in as far as acknowledging, yes, you're the perfect candidate, or yes, we really want you, or any kind of a response really, except for, yes, we received your email, thank you very much kind of thing. So if you get those kinds of responses, I just want to make sure that you're not discouraged by that.
So I think at this point we have been answering some questions throughout because you guys are just awesome and amazing. But Dr. Bailey has also been keeping track of the questions on YouTube. And so we do want to give about 15 minutes to try to address some of those. So if we can do shorter answers to these, then we can get through more questions. And of course, anybody can pipe in. You guys are awesome.
Can I make a quick comment about, there are a lot of questions in here about like step one becoming pass fail and how that's going to affect things. It is going to affect things, but honestly, we're so focused right now on this cycle. That's like a multitude of other conversations. So I don't want anyone to feel like we're kicking that down the road, but we kind of are kicking it down the road because like we are trying to get processes in place for this year. So stay tuned on that. And I think all of the stuff that we're trying to do with transparency and holistic review is going to then translate for that anyway. And that's actually the foundation for moving towards a system where we don't have step one. But we will be releasing more information about that as that gets closer in a couple of years.
So if y'all are ready, I'll just start asking the questions that have been posted and ones that I think are kind of relevant, especially due to our COVID virtual interview process that we're working through. So the first question is, instead of being able to go to pre-interview dinners, how will applicants be given the opportunity to socialize with current residents in order to get a better feel of the program?
So I think that's going to vary by program, but I think a lot of programs are going to have some sort of, I know we're working on this too, some sort of virtual, either like a virtual happy hour or virtual whatever with residents. And so I think that's going to be universal that people are going to do that. It will just be implemented in different ways, but there will be opportunities.
Okay.
Yeah, so to Dr. Rossman's point, I've been to virtual weddings, virtual happy hours, and they're really tough. So what we're actually doing, as opposed to past years, is we are actually having the residents interview all candidates, and we're going to break them up by their year. But these are not meant to be formal interviews like the faculty do, but rather more the opportunity to kind of just chat like 2-on-1, which I think is a little more approachable. Because even when we did it live and everyone would be kind of sitting in one big room, you get the very gregarious people and the ones who are just intimidated by even a group of like 20 or 30 people. So that kind of quote unquote interview gives that opportunity for the residents to really get to know the candidates on a more social level. Because I find it's just hard to do these kind of breakout rooms. I mean, people do them and they work, but that's the approach we're taking.
Yeah, we're going to try to do very small ones. Like we'll probably have multiple that people can do multiple so that it's like 5 and 5 or something like that. So it's a little bit smaller, but I think that's a great idea too, Adam.
Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay.
We're working it out.
It's all good. All right. So the next question has to do with letters of recommendation, and I'm going to read it as it was posted. So for students seeking letters of recommendation, is it better for all 4 letters to be from your home dermatology program, or would it be better to diversify and choose doctors from other specialties? Basically, kind of, is it better to diversify, or more derm letters, the better application?
I actually think it is more meaningful if that person writing the letter knows you well and can write you a strong letter. So I would much rather read a really strong letter from an internal medicine attending that really talks about how great you were on the wards than just a person you met through a virtual rotation that you don't really know as well, at least for me. I think meaningful is what matters the most.
Agree.
Yes.
Yep. Second.
Yeah, I also like, honestly, if you're so uber focused on derm, like that's great, but you should learn everything else, right? Like we want people who are excited that like did well on medicine. And I mean, if you could only relate to people on derm, like that's not necessarily a good sign, right? So I actually do like to see letters from other specialties. It doesn't have to be, a million, but if I see at least one other that you did really well on either peds or surgery or medicine, anything really, that someone who knew you well and worked with you closely, I think that's helpful.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and the comments and the evaluations that you do on other rotations, whether it's OB-GYN and surgery and all these other things, that kind of tells us a little bit more, because I mean, everybody always wants to, knock it out of the park when they're on their derm rotations, but it tells us more about the kind of, practitioner you are, the team player you are, et cetera, when you're on these other rotations that are not just specifically geared to what you're interested in.
And you definitely need to be good in psych for dermatology too. So we need all the skills.
Yeah, in fact, when I was a medical student, my mentor said, if you don't love psychiatry, don't go into dermatology.
Okay. And another question topic that I want to touch on, because I think we have a notable number of international medical graduates amongst the group. And I've seen the question phrased multiple ways, but one thing I saw is, one, are there virtual rotations that accept international medical graduates, or are they specifically being limited to US medical students? And then also, how can our international medical graduates strengthen their derm applications? It's a two-part question.
I think it depends on the virtual rotation. I don't know what the limitations are for VSAS, but I think there are a number of virtual rotations. I mean, ours is pretty much someone emails my coordinator and they are just provided with the links to get onto the various virtual didactics and programs. So there's no screening process whatsoever. You want to come to book club, be our guest, as long as we're not over the limit on WebEx. But I think it varies from rotation to rotation. But I think it's brought up several times. It's going to be tough this year because really there's very little opportunity to engage, and especially if you're coming from even further away and you haven't had exposure, it's going to be hard. I don't have a great answer for the rest of the question, but certainly I think a lot of virtual rotations, I think it's fair game for anybody.
Okay. Thank you.
I think to answer the second part of the question, for me, the hardest part of reading an application for an international medical grad is trying to compare what their experience was in medical school to what I understand is often a very standardized letter from American medical schools. And so I think something you can do to augment your application if you are an IMG is make sure that you have some strong mentors who can speak to your abilities and the skills that you have and what's going to make you a great derm resident in the US.
All righty. Sorry, guys. Fighting this. Another question I saw is, what practical advice do you have for students in regards to making personal connections at distant programs, since there won't be away rotations? Like, do you recommend emails to the PD, the chair, program director? Just how do you advise our students to proceed in expressing their interest virtually?
So we talked about that a little bit earlier, but I would say you can very selectively email program directors, but be selective and make sure that you are coherent about what your interest is and in depth, and not just a like, hi, I'm interested in your program. It really should be a focused email that's like, this is why, I really want to come to St. Louis because I grew up there as a child and have lovely memories of the Gateway Arch. I don't know. So, it should be really specific about why you're interested in that program and what you're looking for. Because if we think you're emailing everybody, then we're not going to be able to respond. And we're getting, we potentially could be getting hundreds of emails. So be mindful of that. Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you know what the program's focus is, it's easier to make this more coherent. So for example, if a program is strictly clinical and you have your PhD in very basic science stuff, and your personal statement says that you want to continue doing basic science research, and you're going to write to this totally clinical program that you really, really want to come there, I will want to know why. So have good reasons for why you're emailing programs and you want to come there.
I just want to vouch really quick to that is completely true. So I had a very scientific application and I applied to some more clinical programs just because everyone tells you apply to X amount of programs, and I did not get an interview. So it's like, don't waste your time or money or their time and money if you know from the beginning there's a mismatch just because you think you have to apply to X number of interviews. So it is absolutely true. I experienced it firsthand.
That is super important. And that's why we ask to potentially reduce the number of applications, because it's hard sometimes for us to gauge who's truly interested or who truly is a good fit. But I will say it does come across like what people are genuinely excited about for the most part. And that's what you want to show in your application. You want your application to tell a story about you, and you want your experiences on your CV to kind of match what you're talking about in your personal statement, and the letters to sort of back that all up. And so if your CV is like super research heavy, but then your personal statement's all about service, that's going to be disconnect to us reading it, right? Because we're like, well, where's that coming from? That doesn't make sense, or vice versa. So it should tell a story. And if there are things that are, what you want to highlight is what you want to highlight from your CV is what you should highlight in your personal statement, because then it all kind of makes sense. And we're like, oh, we get this person. We see what this person is engaged in. And that helps us determine whether you're a good fit for us as well.
And you could also say, I did the basic science route and I actually really want to do more clinical. And we are definitely more of a clinical program. And so that's helpful, because I would be more hesitant for someone who really wants to do basic science research when we are really a very just strong clinical program with more clinical research. So I think be very honest in what you're looking for.
Just to get back to what makes an application stand out, you as residents are going to be expected to be teachers almost from the beginning, because there will be medical students rotating, there will be residents from other specialties rotating. So having teaching experience, you're going to be leaders. Many of you are going to be chief residents. This is the kind of thing that we want to see, is somebody who will be a leader, who can assume responsibility, who can teach a group of other learners. These are all very, very interesting things. And also, I would love for you guys to teach me stuff on a regular basis.
There's a question about how to tell if a program is more clinical or research-based. And you can, probably the easiest way is to just look at the faculty list and see what percentage of the faculty are MD, PhD versus MD. And then if you can't figure it out from that, you can look at publications and see, are they mostly basic science related or mostly clinical?
All right, I'll just jump in to add one more thing. So certain programs have research track programs, and those are your very research heavy programs. So if there's a 2+2 program in place, and sometimes for some programs like UCSF, you even have to pick a different thing on ERAS to apply to that track. So I went to everybody's website and saw who had those kinds of like the 2+2 programs. So that's how I knew. That being said, those programs also want lots of clinical people too. So they usually take 1 or 2 people that are more researchy, but they take a lot of clinical people too.
Yeah, I was going to say that we do have a research track at WashU, but we take 1 person, typically 1, very rarely 2, sometimes 0. And then the rest of our spots are clinical spots. And so we're academic, we do research, but like we don't expect every single we don't expect every person to be doing a ton of research, and not every faculty member is doing a ton of research. So just because you have a research track doesn't mean everyone's expected to do research. And usually most programs do want well-rounded, they want different people doing different things, because that kind of makes it fun for us.
Okay. And one question that's been asked a multitude of ways, and so I'll paraphrase it, is how do y'all recommend applicants address any red flags on their application, whether it be a failed or lower scored step 1, having to repeat a clinical year, taking time off, or even previously not matching? Just how do you advise them to address that?
They should be honest. I think, because we're going to ask the question. Don't act like it's not there, because we're all going to look for that. So, if you had the flu and took step 1 and you're like, just be honest, or say, I just had a bad day, or I think just be very clear about what's going on with your application.
Yep. Address it, be direct. Just say what happened.
And the other thing that I think would make me very interested is what you learned from that particular experience.
Would you advise they address it in their personal statement or in the interview if they get one? I guess, is there a better time?
I think it depends on what it is and how it shows up. So I will say, if I see an obvious red flag, like in the, there's like a year missing, or there's some, like a year of time that like we don't know what happened, or something that happened that you're kind of like, where is this coming from? And you don't know. If it's not mentioned anywhere, then I'm sort of wondering, I'm wondering what that gap is. And like, I'm going to think the worst, right? So like I think you have to decide how big it is and how you want to address it. If it's a step 1 score that wasn't so great, I don't know if that's necessarily like worth putting in your personal statement, honestly, especially if the rest of your application is strong. But I think, if it's something big, then I think you should address it in your personal statement. I think if you didn't match, it's really good for you to talk about that, what you learned, what you did in the interim before you reapplied, because I've definitely seen applications from people who didn't match that they don't even mention they didn't match. And I can just tell, you can kind of tell by the way their like time frame is. And then I'm like, well, did they learn something from it? What did they think happened? Like, we want to see that you're at least somewhat introspective about that. So I think that's something that you should address. So, if it's a bigger issue, I think it needs to be addressed in the personal statement. That's my personal opinion.
And sometimes that stuff is also addressed in letters of recommendation. They can vouch for you and things like that. And then, and even in dean's letters, depending on when something happened and again, how big, whatever happened.
All right. And then the next question I saw is, and my apologies if y'all addressed this while I was MIA and getting sign outs. There is going to be a limit on the number of applications someone can submit, 40 to 60 programs, I'm assuming is the number.
Okay. There's no limit. You can apply as many as you want. We can't regulate that, but we're asking people to self-regulate.
Okay, got it. All right.
There's a lot of questions on here that I've been answering some of them, but I know we've talked about this a little bit with the virtual rotations. Do not feel pressure. If you guys can't do one because the way that your medical school schedule doesn't allow it, it's okay. A lot of programs are not even going to have them. So I don't think there's going to be as many spots as like there would be in a normal year for away rotations in person. If there are 1 or 2 programs that you're really excited about and they have an option and you can do it, great. If you can't, it's okay. There will be other opportunities. There's other virtual meet and greets. There's going on websites. So don't stress about that if it doesn't work out.
There's a question about how helpful are real life thank you cards after interviews. I always start my talk. I say, do not send me a thank you card. And this is not a trick. I'm not trying to see who's going to actually do it. I'm being honest. So I think in general, just don't. I don't know if everyone else agrees with me, but I just don't waste your time.
We start our interview day with the same thing.
It's thoughtful, but you don't have to do it.
Yeah, I think there's actually kind of a push, like just from like a lot of specialties to basically say, and this is something we can talk about as like our program director group, to basically just blanketly say like, do not do it. Because then it doesn't make some people feel like there's an option to, like just to say like, what, as a specialty, we're just going to say, don't do it. We haven't said that yet. Maybe that will come soon. We can put that on a docket to talk about. But I think most people would agree that we don't need to see those. And a lot of times, it does not make a difference to us when we're thinking about ranking you guys.
Right. And I will second what everyone has said. Basically, think about it this way. If you did extremely well on the interview, a thank you card is not going to help you. If you did really poorly on the interview, a thank you card is not going to help you either. So yeah, I agree. Just don't do it.
I will. They're not tricking you when they say don't do a thank you card. I took people up on that graciously to not have to send physical thank you cards. So,
or the email, it's the same thing. It's just not necessary.
Okay. One question, and I think this is really important for our students who don't have home dermatology programs, is what would you advise us do if we don't have a mentor? And then if you do have a mentor, is it a disadvantage to tell them you're interested in applying somewhere else?
I think Alana said this earlier, that if you have a mentor, we want you to be honest with us that there's other programs that you're interested in. We want what's best for you. So I would never hesitate to be honest, because there are so many students who are applying in dermatology. We want you to find the right fit.
Exactly. And also, if you don't have a home program, your mentor is not going to be upset that you're applying somewhere else. They would be happy that you want to get into dermatology.
Okay. So then do you feel it's appropriate to email program directors to express your interest? And then how many, I guess, is too many? Like, how many people is it too much? Like, all right, you're just emailing everybody. What y'all say?
I think for most programs, it doesn't matter. None of us are making our rank list based on the preferences of the people applying. I think the only thing I would say as a program director is sometimes it's nice to know definitively that you have like X, Y, and Z people that are definitely ranking your program number one. It's like kind of reassuring on our end, but it's not going to affect our rank list in any way whatsoever.
Oh, and there was a very good question, I think, about the token system. And again, my apologies if y'all answered it. If you give your token to a program, say you express special interest, but the program, for whatever reason, decides not to interview you, they say, you're not a good fit, do you get your token back, or is it just...
It literally means that you will be guaranteed a holistic review, so you won't be screened out if you would have been screened out otherwise, or maybe people are going through applications very quickly and they would look at yours in depth if they have a token, but it does not guarantee an interview and you don't get it back. And there's a reason for that, right? Because we don't want people to be saying, well, I have two, so I'm going to do like my two reach programs, right? Like, we want you to use it for a program that you actually think is going to be a good fit for you, that you actually want to go to. And that's the point of it actually meaning something, is that it has to be super, super valuable, right? And so that's part of
it. And this can be one of our last questions. And I would love to get kind of every panelist answer on this, because I do think it varies from panelist to panelist. What do you feel is the most important thing that you notice on a dermatology application? Like, what stands out to you?
I can answer that first. Engagement, to me, like, I want to see that you're engaged and excited about something. It doesn't matter to me necessarily what it is. I mean, if it's like playing video games all day, maybe that wouldn't really count. But I mean, like, I think there's a lot of people who feel like, okay, I have to do research, service, leadership, like I have to do everything, right? If you are super engaged in like education and you've done a bunch of stuff in that and that's your passion and you didn't really do much other stuff, like, that's okay for me. Like, if you're super engaged in research but haven't done much volunteer work because you've been really busy doing research, like, that's okay. Again, I'd rather see that you were doing something and following a passion and really owning something and be engaged in it than just like checking all the boxes because you think that's what I want to see.
Right. For me, really, it's the entire application. How we talk about holistic review. It's basically looking at the person from all angles and seeing whether they're going to be a good fit for the program, whether they're going to be a good learner and good leader. But these things, you don't just take one particular aspect of the application and you go, okay, this makes this person the best candidate. That's it. It's the entirety of your experience that brings you to us that makes you a great candidate or not.
Yeah, I mean, for me,
Go ahead,
Courtney.
I have a dog barking. Go ahead.
So for me, it's definitely the number of followers on Instagram, hands down. I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's tough. I actually like both of those answers. I think continuity and completion, showing that you did something regardless of what it is. And I like looking at, extracurriculars and hobbies. It just gives an insight in terms of the type of person you are. But, saying you did like a research elective for 3 weeks, or you volunteered for a week, sometimes it feels like people are doing these things just for the sake of doing them so they can listen on an application. So sticking with something and seeing it out and completing it, I think, is very meaningful. Dr. Alderman's right. It is a holistic thing. I like letters of recommendation. I like personal statements. If your research is something I'm interested in, sure. I've definitely been candidates I've invited just because I want to chat them up about their research, and that's just me personally. But it is going to be the whole package, I think. But that's an important thing, is that we need to allow for us to review the whole package and not cut things out, or allow things in the application to cut that whole application out. And prevent it from being viewed and really appreciated, because a lot of work, I know you guys put a lot of work into these. And so I think, there is a real push to limit those kind of filters that will weed people out just because of one metric. It kind of goes into the whole sense of holistic review. So I really do encourage people to limit that and come up with unique ways to be able to look at as many applications as humanly possible so we can have this holistic review.
Yeah, we get asked that question a lot is, how do you filter X, Y, and Z, kind of things out? And, I think a lot of people, don't, but it's again, just that holistic approach. It's the person, not the, not just one achievement or, we look at.
I think you're muted, Dr. Stumpf.
Am I unmuted now? Thanks. So we just, smaller programs, spending a lot of time, 3 years, together. So we want to make sure we all get along and have a good time while we learn. So. Yeah,
we have 6 residents total. So when I'm going through the applications with our group of people, my word that I always what I think about is, does this person have a soul? Like, do they have a heart? Like, are they actually, like when I read about the comments about you on your clerkships, I want to know that you are a good person. Obviously I want someone who's going to pass the board. So I'm repeating a lot of pretty much what everyone said, but I really want to get a sense that you actually care about patients. Like, you actually want to be a doctor and take care of people. So those are really the things that I'm really looking for, in addition to being smart, pass the boards, all those other things.
Did all of our panelists get a chance to answer that question?
I didn't answer. I would just second what Dr. Altman said. Most programs have a committee of people that are looking at applications, and there probably are individual things that any person on the committee does like to highlight. Maybe someone's looking at teaching capabilities, someone's looking at volunteer experience, someone's looking at research. So it really is a whole package for me when I'm looking at an application. And in terms of just taking the whole committee's insight, it really is everything. And I agree with Dr. Shad as well. Like, we want people who are going to be good people and good doctors.
All right, thank y'all so much. If that's the last question we'll take, so I'll share my screen and just put up our nice little thank you slide. Let me see if I even know how to do this. Probably not. Let's see. All right. Technical difficulties. Well, I will just verbalize the thank you. I would love to thank the Association of Professors of Dermatology for helping us organize and supporting this event. I would absolutely take the time to thank our DIGA board members, Caitlin Brumfield, Itisha Jefferson, Krista Lynn, Jennifer Strunk, Syria Vera Bagu. I hope I said it right. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing. And then Albert Wu. They have been powerhouses behind the scene, making sure that this all came together. And without them, we would not have done this. I would also like to thank each of our panelists for your honest, kind responses to all of our questions. And then thank you to everyone who has attended. And then I would also be remiss to not thank our DIGA faculty advisor, Dr. Robert Brodell, who has been nothing but supportive of the idea since the beginning. So thank you, Dr. Brodell. And thank you all for coming. We have sent out, after the meeting, we're going to send out a recording. We're going to send out a transcript and try to include all the questions and answers that you guys has posed throughout the meeting. And feel free to email us whenever our contact information will be posted. Email us, follow us on Instagram, Twitter. I'll follow you back, help get your numbers up for Dr. Friedman's requirement of Insta followers to get interviewed. And y'all have a great night.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.